meeting, could I remind everyone that today's meeting is being live streamed on the Leeds City Council YouTube channel so that the public can observe the minute without needing to be present. North and East Plans panel deals with applications from the north, east, and the east of the city. The aim of the panel is to hear all the relevant information from applicants, members of public, and council officers to help members of the panel to make their decision. Could I now invite members and officers to introduce themselves and mute your microphone once you have introduced yourself? If I start from the left, Andrew.
Andrew Crates, Planning Services.
David Jones, Planning Services.
Andrew Fosbury, Highways Development Control.
Raymond Jones, Horsforth Ward Councillor.
Jim McKenna, Armley Councillor. Good afternoon, all.
Michael Miller, I'm Councillor for Kippax and Methley Ward.
Afternoon, Councillor Nicole Sharp, and I represent the Temple Newsham Ward.
Afternoon, Councillor John Garvani, Horsforth Ward, substituting for Councillor Jenkins.
Good afternoon, Councillor Jules Hesselwood, representing Wheatwood Ward.
Hello, Ryan Stevenson, Councillor for Harewood Ward.
Good afternoon, Councillor Barry Anderson, Adlan Wharfdale Ward.
Good afternoon, Debbie Oldham, Clerk for the panel.
Good afternoon, Pippa Plumtree Varley, Principal Legal Officer and Legal Advisor to the panel this afternoon.
Good afternoon, David Newbury, Lead Planning Officer for the Plans panel.
Ladies and gentlemen, before we move on to item 1, can I wish you all, since this is the first meeting in 2024, Happy New Year to all of you. Moving on to item 1.
Thank you, Chair. Under agenda item 1, there are no appeals against the refusal of inspection of documents. Under agenda item 2, there's no exempt information. Under agenda item 3, there are no late items. Under agenda item 4, could I ask members to declare any interest they may have?
Chair, on item 9, just to reiterate the declaration I made previously, which is on page 101.
Thank you. Under agenda item number 5, we have apologies from Councillor Jenkins, and Councillor Gavana is his substitute for today. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Gavani. Moving on to item 6, minutes of the previous meeting held on the 16th of November 2023. Do members accept these minutes as correct record? I'll assume correct unless indicated otherwise. No. Matters arising from the minutes. Are there any matters arising from the minutes? Any comments? Right. In that case, we move on to item 7, which will be presented by Andrew. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. So this is the planning application, so reserve matters application for the first phase of the Northern Quadrant. Members will recall this application was brought to the last plans panel in November last year. So it's that first phase of 407 dwellings to the east of Wetherby Road, on the inside of Elaw and north of Red Hall Lane, which you should see on screen now. So this is a further position statement report that's intended to update members on some of the matters that were discussed last time, which principally relate to the design and siting of some of the apartment blocks and how they relate to the wider development and Elaw itself. So I have a number of slides today to present to members, and you'll have seen some of these in your report packs. So firstly, one of the concerns was around the design of the apartment blocks themselves. I'll just point out a couple of the blocks here on the entrance to the site. And there were some concerns raised last time about the architectural and design quality of those buildings. So I've included this slide as a bit of a comparison So the buildings on the left-hand side of the screen are the apartments as were proposed and presented to members last time. And then through discussions with the applicant and workshop sessions with design officers, we've arrived at the designs on the right-hand side of the screen. So before they were in a mixture of brick, render and timber paneling with grey tile roofs. And to the right, we've moved to a more cohesive design, focusing on red brick and render. So I'll just move on to the next slide, which hopefully is a bit clearer and allows me to describe in a bit more detail. Significantly, one of the issues with the previous elevations was the size of the windows relative to the amount of solid mass on those brick elevations. So on the front areas particularly, you'll notice we've got much larger windows. We've introduced these projections which help to break up that very flat 2D elevation we had previously. We have projecting bays either side of that. As I say, larger window openings with Juliet balconies, and similarly to the rear, we've introduced some Juliet balconies and again further projecting rear portion of the building. Additionally, there are we've focused on the brick plinth as well. So there's an engineering brick at the very base with a further sort of setting to set the building within the landscape grounds that they will sit in. One of the things that we've also looked at is the gable elevations of these blocks, where we've introduced some brick patterning within the gable elevations to introduce some interest, and they also feature on the rear elevations as well. I'll show those in a bit more detail shortly. Again, we have some further elevations. This was the other block, which is cranked in the middle. And again, you see a similar approach in terms of larger window openings and the projecting bays, which help to give much more texture to those buildings. And I've included this slide, which shows the Flemish bonding patterning that we've introduced in part of the elevation. So effectively, you have pronounced headers which project forward, and the recessed stretcher bricks. Just to really kind of emphasize the detail, that you probably couldn't see that clearly on the previous slide. The developers also come forward with a CGI of what some of those elevations would look like. So this is coming into the site, looking ahead to the two blocks that will be ahead of you, and there will be the other two blocks on the right-hand side. So I think that deals with the elevational design matters. The other aspect was the siting of the apartment blocks and the concern that they could appear somewhat dominant on entry into the development site. So to orientate members from this section, on the right-hand side of the screen is the A58 Elaw junction. And so in the report, I've tried to set out what some of those distances would be. So that first dwelling there, that's set back 23 metres from the back edge of that access into the site. And then the first apartment block is 40 metres. So for the members who were on the site visit last time, where we stood at the end of the turning head, that's the point at which, as I say, is 40 metres away from that give way line. And then as described in the report, so there's a 17-metre gap between those two apartment blocks. So overall, in that context, from an officer perspective, we're satisfied that the approach is acceptable. The other thing I've mentioned in the report is the principle of gateway buildings, which aren't uncommon on development schemes. You'd often expect an apartment building or a building of some stature and the entrance to a development. And members will recall that on the middle quadrant reserve matters that were approved last autumn, that scheme also had similar 3-storey apartment buildings at its entrance. So in light of those distances, from an officer perspective, we're comfortable that the designs proposed are appropriate in this instance. The other thing, just to pick up on was the comment previously about the footway cycleway along the southern side of the development, and the concern that 3 meters would be an inadequate width for a footway and cycleway. Further discussion has taken place to consider that point further with highway officers, and the conclusion is that 3 meters is acceptable and is in line with the adopted transport SPD and is comparable with the footway and cycleway links that we've achieved on the other sites and indeed other schemes across the city. So I think that probably concludes the presentation, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you. Could I now invite the sorry, could I invite the applicant to the table to address the panel and inform us of any of their proposals?
Thank you, Chair. I'm Adam Jackson, Planning Manager at West Yorkshire. As some of you may remember, it's from the last panel. It's not too long since I was sat here discussing this site. It was pleasing on the day in November to hear some of the positive comments we got, just sort of more generally on the scheme. And since that time, as Andrew's indicated, the focus has been on the apartments, which we discussed sort of more at length at that last committee meeting. We met with Nadir from the design team in early December, had a really positive workshop session with him. And I think by and large, we've taken on pretty much every comment and suggestion that was made at that workshop session and implemented them in the elevations that you can see today. I won't go over all the changes we've made because I think Andrew's covered that in his report and just then. But just to pick on some of the main things that I think have had a real positive influence on what you can see. We've simplified the materials. So previously we had the render on the side elevations and across the upper floors as well. We've removed that. We've just got the render on the central projection now. So we've got a simplified palette of materials. We've made some subtle design tweaks. Andrew's sort of showing you some examples of the brick patterning we could do on the side and rear elevations and the plinth as well, just to sort of set it, establish it more with more of a presence on the site. I think generally what we've done is raised the design quality of the proposal and the design overall, and I think it's in keeping with the contemporary character area that we're trying to achieve on this part of the site. As Andrew mentioned as well, we've got much larger window openings, so solid to void ratios was a big thing that we tried to pick up on. And I think that with the reduction in the render and some sort of tweaks to the position of some of the blocks to sort of provide some bigger gaps through and allow more natural light through the spaces, just overall has reduced the dominance of the apartments and increased the feeling of openness that you would get on the entry to the site. Worth mentioning, and that Andrew has picked up on it, that on both sides of the entrance into the site from the A58, we do actually have we will have quite a generous area of soft landscaping. So the apartments are set back behind this, and we have 2-story dwellings before you get to the first apartments on either side of the road. So the design intent has always been for a gateway feature. That is what we're trying to achieve, and we're not trying to hide the apartments. The intention is it's part of the wayfinding for the development that you would see the apartments on entry, but in reality, what you're going to get is you're going to get some soft landscaping, some 2-story dwellings, and then the 3-story apartments behind. So it sort of builds up sequentially in that way. And the intention, obviously, is to not be too jarring as you approach the site from ELO. I won't repeat everything that I said last time. Like I say, we covered most of the points at the last committee meeting, but I will reiterate that it's a site that we own in full. We want to start construction as soon as we can, as soon as we get the approval. We've been working in the background on some of the pre-commencement conditions so we can get those in as soon as possible. You'll be aware there's a very generous 106 package attached to the outline permission, which for this phase equates to about £7.5 million worth of payments. And on top of that, around £1 million worth of SIL payments as well, which we'll be providing hopefully this summer as soon as we can get on, should we get an approval. Yeah, like I said, I don't want to repeat anything, but I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you. Do member have any questions for Ms. Jackson? Councillor Sharp?
Thanks, Chair. At the last meeting, I I commented on the actual appearance of the apartment blocks. They did look like, I said at the time, 90s police station, purpose-built police stations to me. Sorry, they did. But you have taken on board the comments that we made. And I think it's definitely a vast improvement, and thank you for that. Just in relation to the elevation of the apartments, the side elevation, have you thought about a living wall?
We haven't. It's the first time it's been suggested, if I'm being totally honest. I mean, it's potentially something we could look at. That I think with living walls, you've got to bear in mind which way it's facing. So depending on the site, whether it gets enough natural light or not. And I'm not sure what sort of extra work you need to do to sort of maintain the integrity. You're seeing them quite often on commercial developments. But I think we'd have to give some further thought of how that would work in terms of on those side elevations. You are onto someone's living room or kitchen, wherever it may be, potentially a bedroom. I'm not sure what extra sort of, I guess, watering, resting, things like that. We'd have to sort of bear in mind. Just doesn't affect the integrity of the build really. It's something we could look at, but if I'll be honest, it hasn't been raised to now, so I can't say much more on it right now, to be fair.
Any other questions? Councillor Gavani.
Thank you, Chair. The Flemish bond giving the relief work, are there any security issues around that? 'Cause it makes quite a nice little climbing wall.
I wouldn't have thought so. I mean, I take the point. I mean, it's. I don't think the projections on the brickwork would be that deep, but yeah, there is obviously some projection that maybe you could get a little grip on. I think where they're located, they're generally on the side. Those windows wouldn't be opening windows, and I think for the rear as well, especially at ground floor. So I wouldn't say it's any more of a security risk than just having Juliet balconies, for example. You know what I mean? I think you could, in theory, climb up to most windows on most buildings, but I don't think their introduction would add any sort of greater security risk than what would be there before.
Right. Thank you, Mr. Jackson. Can I now invite members if you have any questions for officers? Any comments? Thank you. Can I ask David to go on to the next phase, please?
Yes, thank you, Chair. It may be, if we look at the questions, it may be that Councillor Sharp's already answered questions 1 and 2, but do members have any particular comments in respect of the siting and the design? Do they share Councillor Sharp's point of view?
I've made the point repeatedly. I don't think the apartments are in the wrong place on the entrance. I think it's too a high build as you enter it, and I think they could be relocated. But I think I'm increasingly a lone voice on that point. But it's one I will repeat today.
So all in favor, if you can show, raise your hand. And anyone against? Any abstentions? No? All right, then, okay. So we've taken your vote on board. Thank you.
So, Chair, just to clarify, then members through the show of hands have indicated that they're happy with the siting and the design of the of the blocks. There is a third question which is on the papers, which is if this is a reserved matter application. It's very unusual that we brought 2 position statements to the panel to look at the reserved matters, as it were. So we're not talking about the principle. We're just talking about the siting, the design, the layout, and the landscaping the scheme and plus some points of the access. The third question is, members have seen it twice. If members are content with the details that they've seen, are they content for officers then to progress with the application and with a view to us subsequently approving the application? Although if there are issues, of course, we'll bring it back to members for determination.
Yeah. Anyone against? Any abstentions? No. Thank you.
Okay, that's great. Thank you very much, members.
Carry on.
So we're on to item 8.
All right, sorry, I'm miles away today. So moving on to item 8, which will be led by Stuart when he's ready.
We'll get there. Right. Thank you, Chair. Following application is brought before members as a position statement to inform you of the proposals and to seek members' views in relation to questions set out within the report. The proposal relates to an outline application for industrial development with all matters reserved apart from access into the site at land off William Packing Way, Thorpe Park. Members may know the site as Barrowby Lane or Brown Moor. So the following 2 slides are overhead images of the site showing the triangular shaped land in the centre with William Packing Way to the west, the M1 motorway to the east and the Leeds Selby railway line to the north. This particular slide shows the site in a wider context with the Springs Leisure and Retail Complex to the west, Elaw running to the north, and then the East Leeds extension would be to the northwest. So the following sets of slides are different images of the site from varying areas. So this particular slide shows the application site from the from the south, with the application site to the right, where all the trees you can see there. And for context, these trees are to be retained. This is taken from William Packing Way again, but this shows the difference in levels between the application site and the road, just to give some context of levels, etc. This is again for William Packing Way, but this you can see in the distance the green bridge which spans from the application site, goes over, connects to the Springs, as well as into the housing, as well as and other green space areas. This is taken from the Springs roundabout, with the application site directly in front of us, and the trees are there to give some context to that. This is again taken from William Packing Way, but this is now looking back. So the application site is on the left of the image with the green bridge there in front of you. So here we have the access point for the development. The access would be taken from the right of the image, from the signalised junction that you can see in front of you. This is looking directly at the access point, and for reference, the Red Row housing development is directly behind you. And then this is looking the other way from the towards the access of the site on the left. We're now on the motorway, so this is the M1 southbound. The application site is on the right, with the trees and the landscaping there to be largely retained. Further down the motorway, but in the distance you can see the bridge. This is another bridge that connects the site to the land on the opposite side of the motorway, just for reference. And again, you can see from that some of the levels differences between the site and the motorway. And finally, for the images, this is taken northbound from the slip road of the M1, and then the application site is on the left-hand side, and again, it demonstrates the levels. And in the far distance, you'll be able to see the bridge that we were just talking about in the previous slide. This one shows the site and a set of prows and bridleways that run through the site and connect over to give some sort of context to that. So moving on to the application, the proposed development would consist of around 55,000 square metres of industrial development on land which is now allocated within the SAP for employment uses. This is the indicative layout. This layout also shows how green spaces would work and become an integral part of the development. Approximately 40% of the site is suggested to be retained and enhanced as landscaped areas. The submitted master plan also indicates a central route which would provide users with extensive areas of landscaping, providing a number of different functions. The largest area would be to the south and to the west of where the existing woodland is to be retained, with paths around which would connect into the existing prow network. Due to the levels on the site, it's intended to have 6 development plots where the buildings would be located. Plot 1 would be the highest, and this would sit adjacent to the motorway, with plot 6 the lowest, adjacent to the access road on William Parking Way. So this gives an indication of the indicative building heights. So the red buildings would be up to 18 metres, the orange up to 15, and the yellow up to 10 metres in height. So this follows that the lower buildings are on the lowest part of the site, the taller buildings on the highest part. So this is an illustrative massing plan. So this is taken from the north of the other side of the railway line and looking south, obviously towards the application site, with the taller buildings within the top of the image, and then the smaller scale buildings towards the bottom right. So this is another block plan, but this time this shows the connectivity of the site and how it's proposed to connect the routes through with the existing prow network over the bridge, etc. So this connects with Green Park to the Springs, as well as over the railway line and the motorway, as well as through the site. So we've got some sections here. So this just gives an indicative idea of the levels differences we were talking about and how it would work internally. The top section is between the highest and the lowest plots. The bottom section plan is taken further within the site, just to again emphasize levels. And then this one, the 3 slides here are all one section taken from William Parking Way in the top left all the way through to the railway line on the bottom right of that slide. So finally, this illustrated drawing provides some indication of how the buildings could look, bearing in mind that appearance is not being considered at this stage. However, the applicants have indicated that there would be a theme running through the buildings, both in terms of material palette and design. Overall, officers consider that the principle of development is acceptable given the allocation of the land within the SAP. While some outstanding matters do remain with regard to highways and drainage, these are not considered to be insurmountable and are in the process of being addressed now. The surrounding area is predominantly commercial, though some residential properties are located approximately 120 metres away within the Red Road development. This is an outline application. No end users are known, and therefore matters regarding hours of operation and any flues, etc., are not known at this particular stage, but officers consider these can be suitably addressed through subsequent applications and conditions. So members' views are sought with regard to the direction of travel for the development, including layout, design and landscaping. However, it is noted that these considerations would be addressed in any subsequent reserved matters application, with a proposal only seeking permission for the principle of development and access into the site at this stage. And with that in mind, nothing further to add, Chair.
Thank you. We've got a couple of speakers, local elected member, Councillor Mark Dobson, and also the applicant. Can I ask Councillor Dobson to come to the top table, please? When you're ready, you got 4 minutes, Councillor Dobson.
Thank you, Councillor Akhtar, and good afternoon, panel. Whilst I'm aware that this is only a position statement this afternoon, I did think it was important to make a brief representation this afternoon to perhaps highlight a few points to panel that maybe they would deem worthy of further consideration. As I say, whilst this is only a position statement at this time, I'm hoping with a application of this magnitude in this sensitive area on a green belt site will persuade the panel that obviously this is the start of a very long process, and I'm mindful and hopeful that this will be invited back to panel through the various stages of its life as an application rather than be delegated. Obviously, as a site which has always been part of a natural boundary between communities, it's disappointing to see any green site being brought in to any application. And it's a shame that obviously all 37 sites weren't honoured, but we are where we are. So with that in mind, I am hoping that panel today and going forward will obviously give this a great deal of their time and interest. As has been kind of laid out this afternoon, there are several issues regarding the actual layout that's being proposed at the moment, some measures regarding mitigation in terms of the sort of green areas and what is considered in terms of appropriate retention of some of the green space, but also I think for somebody who regularly walks that area, there has to be a great deal of consideration given to any access and of course for people who currently enjoy the facility as a piece of green space, the right of way implications for local residents. It is, of course, as a green site, subject to a great deal of wildlife, and obviously, I'm hoping that panel will be mindful of the ecostructure and the implications for wildlife, and we'll be seeking full reports in terms of mitigation going forward. As has been said, the access could present challenges, and it's been demonstrated in the slide. So again, I think that needs a great deal of further work. To be blunt, it would be a shame to see this piece of green space be removed from green space and developed. And there is no way that the three local members for Garforth and Swillington will be supporting the application, but equally, and being pragmatic, I also hope that going forward in this process, panel will be mindful of CILM 106 implications and to ensure that there are some significant community contributions if panel at a later stage are mindful to accept this application. I have been asked by members of the public just to highlight a couple of things. Firstly, I believe that we are still in a period when this application, seeing as it was passed on the supplemental process last month, could still be subject to challenge. I have also been asked to raise by members of the public the fact that in the Garforth and Swillington ward, we have some applications now approaching 4 years old and still undetermined. So I'm hoping that the speed and alacrity put behind this application can be replicated elsewhere. And it's also my understanding that there is a petition with 1,500 signatures on that needs to be presented at some stage, hopefully to panel. Have I got the bleep there, Chair? Not bad. 30 seconds out. Thank you.
Any questions for Councillor Dobson? Councillor Stevenson? Councillor Barry Anderson?
Thank you. Two questions, please, Councillor Dobson. You mentioned lastly a petition there. Do you know if they've been submitted as responses to this plan application as yet, formally? And the second question is, on page 59, there's a paragraph which suggests or says that during the last 12 months, which, as you've referred to, was during a legal process, the applicants and their agents have been working together on a number of iterations of this plan in order to get it to where it is now. During those 12 months, have you been consulted by the applicants or officers as ward members?
Thank you. On the first part of the question, I received the information regarding a petition anecdotally, and I'm hoping that officers could perhaps clarify, because there are two issues here that I've been quite mindful to bring to residents' attention. The first one being, is this petition in relation to the actual planning application? And if that is the case, then I'm hoping that officers will be able to enlighten us as to that, and again, let me and others know if this has found its way into this process. But alternatively, I'm quite mindful that it could have been a petition with regard to the outcome of one of the 37 sites of the sapri process, and I'm unclear on that point. So actually, I'm also seeking that clarification. If it's the former, then it's not a matter for me, but I would hope that panel would seek out that petition and perhaps give it some interest. In the second point, it is fair to say that the applicants have been semi-regular in terms of interaction with ward members, less so from officers, and until the site came forward through the sapri process last month, as it is now, then it's really was quite quiet on that front, although the three members have been asking officers a range of significant questions regarding the application, as one would imagine. So again, this is why I'm somewhat on a back foot this afternoon, because of the speed with which the position statement's been brought forward. I find myself somewhat flying by the seat of my pants this afternoon, so I'm afraid I can't give you a massively detailed answer on that one, Councillor.
Councillor Anderson?
Right, I was going to ask you about public consultation, but I think you've probably covered that clearly. But two other issues. I don't know this area intimately, but because of the heights, what's the potential visual intrusiveness going to be in the area? And secondly, at a recent workshop I attended, we talked about improving connectivity and meeting the climate change initiatives. How connected is this site so that people wouldn't need to drive to get to it, that there is public transport in the area or plans for public transport in the area?
Okay, Councillor, on the first point, I am quite fortunate in as much as I currently enjoy access to that particular piece of property on a very regular basis. If you were coming from Garforth, you'd probably go down Barrowby Lane, which runs parallel with the Wakefield Road. You would then go through Barrowby Woods. When you get to the top of Barrowby Woods, you would then find yourself walking parallel with the motorway, and the triangular piece of land in question would be on your right hand side. So far so good. The real challenge comes in terms of the visual impact when you drop down onto William Parkin Way, and after that, let's say for example the Springs is directly in front of me and I will be turning right as if I were going to the bridge, then the property in question is highly elevated. I won't call it a bowl, but if you can imagine where the Springs is and the current dual carriageway is leading to the bridge and then onto Elaw, it is heavily elevated to the left-hand side. So I do think that the applicant, from my perspective, would need to demonstrate how the visual impact of that could be mitigated, not least from the fact, obviously, it's opposite a retail shopping park, but of course, beyond that, you have a new developing, burgeoning residential estate. And I think the question I would be raising if I lived in that locality, what is this thing going to look like when I'm looking towards the motorway in terms of visual impact? So whilst I am happy to accept that this is an application in its very early stages, I do think that I'm hoping to rephrase that panel would be mindful to dig a great deal deeper into that element of the application as it's brought forward. In the second part, I'm not aware of any new proposals regarding public transport, but there has been a little bit of a checkered history, certainly since the Springs opened, in as much as ward members and other ward members from surrounding wards lobbied quite hard for public transport to be delivered at the Springs, but this has been subject to quite a significant amount of chopping and changing due to the nature of, simply put, how people access the Springs as it is currently. The vast majority of people seem to access by car, but actually, and quite this is a good thing, you also get a lot of people, say from Garforth, who access the Springs now in the nice weather on foot. But in terms of public transport, it is quite limited. I suppose the only other thing I would ask panel to be mindful of is the fact that whilst one could argue, and it's a reasonable argument, that the motorway link and of course the links to Elaw are very solid, this will of course come with the added impact of more traffic movement, significant traffic movement already around a sensitive location, and of course then the argument could be progressed, is it in line with the council's ambitious carbon reduction targets? So again, all matters that I'm sure the panel will want to consider over a longer period of time than today.
Councillor Johns.
Obviously, Mark will know that I know the area exceedingly well. Mike, I have several concerns, and first of all, can I correct you? It's not public transport, it's private transport. Let's be clear. This is run by private companies at a profit. This site, in my honest view, will be, how can I put it, pretty inaccessible from public transport in some areas, and it will lead to more traffic on that. And I remember when that area was completely green, by the way. My concern is how much use does the public use of this area now, and how much more of that can we take before it makes a matter that people have nowhere to walk and nowhere to run or do various other things. So I'm interested in what your view is. Is it well used, not well used, or, and I know I'm slightly off course here, but from my point of view, I have deep concerns about how much more of that land we can take before it becomes a point where you can't get from Garforth to Cross Gates via, other than by coming up the main road. I'm concerned about
that. Thank you, Councillor Jones. I think you make some very good points, and I'm more than happy to be corrected on your assessment of private and public transport and what we should use in terms of the terminology. More than happy to be corrected. I think, taking my elected member's hat off for a moment, I'm an avid dog walker, and it is a site I use regularly to access any number of locations, not least for the green space itself. Prior to the original development, which is now well established on the site, there were walkways, cycle. It was extremely popular for off-road cycles, walking, running, and over time we have seen that definite erosion. I think I alluded to it in my original presentation, that one thing I think a lot of people are passionate about, and I think what's important to Leeds people, is the fact that unlike a lot of major cities, we have quite a small city centre and then satellite towns and villages from which we all benefit, not just because of their uniqueness, but because we do have natural green corridors. And there was a time when you could walk from Garforth through to Temple Newton pretty much unfettered by any building, really. Obviously, that's changed. I think the point that I would make is, what would one call a line in the sand before all necessary green space and boundaries is lost? Again, speaking somewhat anecdotally, but with a degree of authority as a local resident. When I use Barraby Woods through to the original walk path that's currently there, it is incredibly well used. I'm always surprised how many people go out in the dead of winter, which I see virtually every week. And if ever I wanted to conduct an ad hoc surgery rather than a formal setting, I've just got to walk through Barraby Woods and down towards the Springs, because it's like ants, people coming backwards and forwards and wanting to chat. And it's a very well used, popular, public piece of access. And I don't really think I need to elaborate anymore. It's very well used, and I think Councillor Jones makes some points that, definitely concern both myself and other local residents.
Councillor McKenna.
Thank you, Chair. Mark, I was very interested in your comments, and much you have said I could agree with. And should this progress as a planning application, I'm sure the panel and people around the table will take cognizance of what you say. But I am a little puzzled because I read the Garford and Swillington ward members' comments, and you say very clearly that it should be refused. Is that still your position, or do you wish to see it come forward and the queries and the problems you've rightly outlined be addressed during its progress through the planning system, or is it still you want to see it refused? I understand the issue about the green belt, so I don't think you need to go into that. But thank you.
Thank you, Councillor McKenna. I certainly wouldn't insult your intelligence with a lecture on the importance of the green belt. Yes, Garforth and Swillington members, of course, would like to see the application refused and would like to see the triangular piece of land that members have seen today be retained in its current form. However, unfortunately, I don't think we live in utopia, and back in good old Leeds, I do think that there is a strong probability based on the sapri-mittal process and the direction of travel that because of the changes to the SAP, this land has come forward. And the pragmatic part of my nature would think, whilst our position remains, we would like to see it refused. What I'm asking panel at this stage is to, and I think this is a given because I'm speaking to obviously people who give these issues absolute diligence, that every single nuance of this application is explored thoroughly, fairly and diligently to reach the right decision. But, you know, ward members' position hasn't changed. We like the fact that there is that green pocket. We, I sometimes say, and it's a semi-joke, but, you know, when I go off to meet my maker and I'll look down on God's version of Google Earth, I'd still like to see some green division between our communities, and that stands.
Thank you, Mark. That's very clear.
All right, thank you. I can't see anyone else, so thank you, Mark, for your attendance. Can I now invite the applicant?
Thanks, Chair.
To the table. When you're ready, you've got 4 minutes, sir.
Good afternoon, and thank you, Chair. My name's Adam Varley. I work for the Scarborough Group with the applicant of the scheme that's been proposed in its outline form. I'd just like to take the opportunity just to express some comments around why we've taken the approach and where we see the vision for the development that's been proposed. And that it obviously sits and adjoins an established employment allocation. We've thought Park a tremendously successful scheme in our eyes, and been represented by a number of third parties in terms of the occupancy level and awards that scheme has won. The intention, it always was that this would sit as in harmony to the Thorpe Park development, so it picks up a lot of the similar design language, albeit appreciate today we're not talking at that level of detail, and that would picked up in the reserve matters, which we intend to bring forward as quickly as possible based on the acute shortage of industrial employment land. The whole emphasis around the application was about a diversification of jobs from those that already exist at Thorpe Park, which are principally office-based, albeit with the addition of the Springs has broadened that further with the retail and leisure allocations. But we believe the proposed development addresses, as I say, a lot of the shortages of land allocation within Leeds as local plan, as well as providing much needed employment land and choice and variety for businesses, particularly inward investment opportunities into the city region. So we're hopeful that the application continues and allows us to platform effectively to bring forward the reserve matters as quickly as possible for the individual buildings, picking up on a lot of the comments that have been discussed by the case officer, as well as those that have been referenced by the previous speaker.
Thank you, Mr. Warley. Any questions? Councillor Anderson?
We've seen from the papers that you've been in discussions with the council for some time. We've also heard about can you tell me what consultations you feel you've had with local ward members and local residents? We've heard what Councillor Dobson's had to say. From your perspective, in that 12 months, how often have you met with ward members to keep them up to date? And in that 12 months, how often have you spoken to local residents to give them an idea as to the benefits that will come if this development goes ahead?
Thank you, Councillor Anderson. So during the process of the application, we've spoken to members about this proposed scheme. Originally, it was in a bit more detail than what's been discussed today in terms of outline. So it started to underline some principles of design and the design language, which is part of the pack that you've seen, and Andrew's kindly taken you through the case officer today. In terms of the public consultation, we've hosted 3 sessions, all at the Springs leading up to the application, where we took soundings from members of the public and have been interpreting those into the design of the scheme and refining that, albeit, again, I appreciate a lot of that isn't being discussed today because it forms part of what will be the reserve matters in terms of the actual buildings. I hope that clarifies the question.
I did ask Councillor Dobson the question about visual intrusiveness. What would be your potential ideas, not necessarily detailed ideas, but in broad strategic terms, in order to mitigate against the visual intrusiveness?
So as part of the application, we've been looking at the views, and which were agreed with the council in terms of those long range views. We're looking at amenity landscaping as part of the wider scheme to lessen some of those impacts, as well as the individual design and the character of the buildings, of which we'll clearly work with officers to ensure that we mitigate where practical measures are available to us.
Thank you, Councillor Gavani.
Thank you, Chair. On the intrusiveness, visual intrusiveness still, you said in the papers that the taller buildings will be at the highest point of the site. Surely if you want to reduce the visual intrusiveness, you put the taller buildings at the lowest point and the lower buildings at the highest point to keep that top height down. Have you any thoughts on that?
Yeah, thank you for the question, Councillor. We've been looking at the plateaus and the levels as part of the more detailed reserve matters application that would come forward to address some of the visual impact. The rationale behind some of the larger buildings is a function of the demand and the makeup of the floor plates relative to the scale of the plateaus that we can bring forward. So the larger buildings tend to have the higher eave structures, and it's just not practical in terms of access into the site adjacent to the railway network, as well as obviously reflecting some of the comments around the residential uses at the front of the site, to have the larger footprint buildings positioned in the lower quadrants and segments of the site. So the bigger format buildings are a function really of the topography and what we've been trying to work with the constraints of the actual site itself.
Right, any other questions? Councillor McKenna?
Well, thank you. You've heard concerns from Councillor Dobson. This is a very green area. I have had connections with it. And I do know the site quite well. But a planning minister, government once said, and I know we're only talking about the principle of bringing it forward for employment and access, but at the end of the day, we will have to look at the design more closely than we are today. But does it have to look like big sheds on the side of the motorway, as a government minister once said, and I think it's often that terminology is often used in planning terms. It's certainly a very green area. Obviously, landscaping is going to be very important. Have you thought about green roofs? Have you thought about any type of tree planting? You know, at the end of the day, you will have to come forward with these. I know you don't have to address it today. You're just talking about the principle. But these are, I think, the concerns of people around the table and local people that we need to know that it's still going to look as green as it can after this industrial estate. But as I say, it's very bland looking at the moment. Nothing that raises my pulse or inspires me in any way. And the next time we see it, we will have to look more deeply at that. Now is an opportunity to perhaps to address that. I know you said in consultation that you have given more detail, but that detail is not here before panel members today.
Thank you, Councillor McKenna. Addressing your comment around the appearance of the individual buildings, of course, we will engage with the design officers to ensure that we lessen the impact, and specifically around green roofs, we haven't considered that yet in the level of detail that it would require. However, we're obviously working within the constraints of what is practical for those types of employment use spaces. We will clearly be addressing some of the design in terms of net carbon zero and the agenda that we try to deliver through the built form to make them as sustainable structures alongside, obviously, the demand from the occupational market as well as our investors. So yes, we will be looking in forensic detail at the environmental impact of the buildings. We'll also address amenity planting clearly where we can to soften and make the buildings blend and reduce the impact that they may have, appreciating that they are obviously a functional asset. As you say, the detail will come forward in the reserve matters, and Stuart, the case officer, kind hinted at some of the types of images. We're trying to create something that sits in harmony with the Thorpe Park development, not brushing up against it. So a lot of the landscaping will mirror those that have been brought forward through the Green Park. And I appreciate Mr. Councillor Dobson's comments around some of the connectivity and the public rights of way, which will be preserved as well as enhanced with improving the connectivity through the site for different types of users, which again will be dealt with through some of the detail in the reserve matters application. I think I've covered all of your questions there, but if there is any more, I'm more than happy to take those.
Oh, that's fine, thank you.
Right, Councillor Sharp.
Thanks, Chair. Sorry, just off the back of what Councillor McKenna's just said. It's on paragraph 9, page 61. You make reference to existing boundaries, and given the response you gave to Councillor Gavani, I think that there needs to be some established boundary of vegetation going in there as well, not just around the actual buildings.
Thank you, Councillor Sharp. Clearly, we will look at all of the boundaries around the estate, including those that will run along the rail connection. I presume that's the boundary that you may have been referring to, but we will look at the site treatment as a whole, and we'll take on board those comments when we get into that level of detail.
Thank you, Mr. Wali, for your time. Can we now move on to any questions for the officer? Mr. Anderson?
A number. Sorry, I'll try and be as concise as I can. So, starting with paragraph 2. If I can get my report back again. Yeah. How come you're short of staff? in planning. So why have we spent so much time on this application when up until probably December, there was no chance at all of this coming forward? And so what have you done in order to keep the elected members fully informed and advised as to the progress?
Thank you, Councillor. Do you want me to answer that one first? Yeah, sure. So the application was submitted validated in January of last year. At that point, the site was greenbelt, and it's only just become, and the applicant had put forward what in their view was very special circumstances to justify the development. Officers have been working with that in mind, and then trying to address the other concerns as well raised by highways, drainage, landscaping, etc. So yes, there are issues in terms of staffing, but that doesn't prevent us being proactive as we should be, as the government wants us to be. So that's what we've been working on over the past 12 months.
What I'm getting at, when I've asked for information, I keep being told, well, there isn't enough staff to give advice, which is fine, because they're doing other things. So what I'm asking is, we've heard from Councillor Dobson that he feels there should have been more information, more conversations being taking place with local ward members as things were moving forward, and there should also have been greater engagement with the public in terms of keeping them fully informed and advised as to what was going forward, so that when you come forward with an application at the end of the day, you've got as good a buy-in as you're probably going to get, because the people who object will object almost no matter what. But the vast majority of people in the middle, you would hope you'll have converted over, you'll have explained the benefits to it. Was there any reason why you didn't go down that line?
I'm not really fully understanding the question, but just to put it in context, the site is split over 2 wards. Garfield and Swillington has approximately about a third. The vast majority is in the Temple Newsham ward, and it's adjacent to the Crossgates ward as well. So at the start of the process, all 3 ward members were notified of the application, as well as the pre-application that came in with that. The application was advertised as we would do with site notices, as well as advertised in the local press. We've had in total, I think it was 7 letters of objection, as well as the comments from the ward members as well. But what I will say is the vast majority of them comments are related to the principle of development in terms of it being greenbelt at that particular time. But obviously that has now faded away. In terms of what I've done as an officer, I've been working on the application. As I say, I'm not necessarily fully understanding the question, Councillor Anderson. Sorry if I'm missing that.
I can't see many mentions of the NPPF in this document explaining where the benefits are coming in terms of compliance with the NPPF. There is no mention of how it's going to comply with the future proposals that the council are trying to work forward, so that you're trying to get them to do it voluntarily. There's not necessarily, they don't have to do a lot of these things, but you would think we would be starting to push them to volunteer to do things like improving the viability, improving the visual amenities voluntarily, without the need for plans panel to have to go along and say, do this, do that, do the other. So there's no reference to that. You've also got no mention of the petition to bring to our attention whether or not that, I've not seen the petition, so I've heard there's a petition. So, but if there was one, why is that not being in the report? And can you answer the question about the legal challenge that still, I'm told, can still be taken up to the 29th of February? So we could end up in a real mess if this one's coming forward. And also the comments that I made about the transport connectivity, why that's not being highlighted in here. And you make great emphasis of you hope that conditions will be able to address a lot of the issues that might come up. But what happens if that's not possible and you end up with local residents continually arguing with your friends and colleagues in enforcement, who are then asked to try and implement those conditions? How are we going to how can you reassure us that we won't have these problems with this application? Because it doesn't look as though it's got support locally. in large numbers. So you're already, it's going to be difficult to get that unless you work and sell it more.
Okay, quite a number of points there. So firstly, the petition, no such petition has been submitted to planning. So I don't know about that. In terms of the elements of volunteering bits, as is within the report and as I mentioned in the presentation, it's brought before members as a position statement in outline with only the principal and access remaining. Matters to do with visual amenity, etc., are not up for grabs, I suppose, at this particular stage. Obviously, we can advise, as members have done, to the applicant and to me, which is fine. But at this particular stage, they're not matters for consideration. They will be matters for subsequent reserved matters applications. So that's why it's probably silent in that within the report, because that's not, we haven't got that level of detail at this particular stage. The same, the legal challenge, I'm sure Philip will be able to come in on that. But what I will say is this is a position statement. It's not going to be decided at the end of this anyway. If at the end, if after the legal challenge process is ended, we have a judicial review, we'll take a point at that and say, Philip, do you want to come in on that particular point?
Yeah, that would be the period, that judicial review period. So somebody could challenge the inspector's decision that the inspector's taken on site allocation plan, or those elements that were subject to the remittal.
Okay, I think it's a bit hasty.
Do you want me to cover about the transport? So, as I said, there are still some outstanding matters, one of which is highways, and Andrew may be able to cover in terms of the public transport, but that is a matter that still needs to be worked through in terms of contributions. Andrew, jumped.
What I can say, I'll be honest, what my concern is, I've never, I've been on this council since 1999. I've never once had heard of an application being approved at outline at this stage and ever being taken off the books later on. Never. So in other words, if once we give approval today, that's it. There'll be, by hook or by crook, you will come up with conditions, you'll come up with the ways forward. Today is the decision, because if we say yes today, it's very difficult to roll back from it. So that's why I'm asking those questions just now. I accept that we're not making judgments on them today, but in my mind, I want to be confident that officers are addressing those points, albeit behind the scenes.
Okay, can I just bring David in this, please?
Yes, thank you, Chair. You'll notice that the first question talks about our members content to defer and delegate the grant of the outline planning permission to officers. Of course, that's the first stage, as it were, and then we've got the reserved matter stage, which I think is really going to be, in many ways, the critical stage, because that's when we start to look at the design, properly the design and the siting of the buildings, the landscaping, which is going to be absolutely critical in this application, with the topography, the way that it is, and the size of the buildings that we're actually talking about. So the feeling that I'm getting, and this is for members to come to a judgment on, is that there's probably two things. In terms of the outline, there seems to be a level of concern, but of course you can say to officers, well, bring the final report on the outline to members, because we want to see the conditions and any section 106, the terms of those, for members' consideration before any decision is issued. It's very difficult, I'm saying, putting it in those terms, it's very difficult for us as officers and for a plans panel to resolve from the position that this is allocated for employment uses in the development plan. So the only thing there is the principle, well, the principle's in line with the plan, then it's a technical issue of the highways, and we're moving towards sorting those sort of issues out. But you do have the power to say, it's wholly appropriate, and this is wholly appropriate for you to say this, we want to see the conditions before any planning permission is issued. And also to say to us, well, we want to encourage as much on the reserved matters, as much public engagement as possible, engagement with the ward members, and we would like to see that scheme as it develops come back so we can comment. Because there have already been some very helpful comments coming from the panel members in terms of the layout of the site, the design, and matters of access through the site. So that's all in your gift, and that's part and parcel of the reason that we're bringing the application to plans panel today to get to grips with some of these issues.
Thank you for that, David. Councillor Hazelwood.
Yeah, mine's on, my question's on transport as well. It's not about the contributions, transport, it's about the lack of public transport, to the site. And at the moment, as Ray pointed out, it's private transport. Unless the mayor gets franchising, we can't put routes on where we actually need them. So at the moment, there isn't any routes, bus routes going to the Springs that could take people to the site. So as a city, we're trying to remove cars from the route. You know, we're trying to encourage people onto public transport or private transport, however you want to call it, but out of cars, you know, to meet our net zero targets, etc. But with this, we seem to be the only way to access this site is by car. So I'm a bit confused as to how we address that transport problem, because we seem to be contradicting ourselves.
Chair, you okay if I just on the point of public transport, obviously this is related to the Springs development, and as part of that permission, there's section 106 that requires public transport in the form of a bus service. I know there's been some difficulties with that service and it got stopped, but it has been reinstated. I think it's a 15-minute service. The original permission was for 5 years for the 15-minute service, and then there was a 30-minute service to Leeds city centre that was secured for 10 years. So that's still running. 5 years has admittedly expired, but what happened with the negotiations for reinstating the bus service, it was very much felt that that could be done on a proper commercial basis. So there's no suggestion that the service that's in place currently will stop. Having said that, what we're looking to do as part of this application is make sure that it is accessible by public transport. And I think it's also worth saying, and it's in the public domain, there is obviously the prospect of a rail halt coming potentially at some point. So again, that features into officers' thoughts in terms of potential contributions, for example, to help deliver those types of schemes. So we will very much be making sure that it's accessible from a public transport perspective.
Thank you. Councillor McKenna.
Thank you, Chair. Following on really from Barry, in some ways, but I'm not just elaborate on it, but not contradict it. I find it difficult, this one, because quite frankly, the report is only to note. And if we were, and I can't help talking about question 1, David, because you raised it, but if we were to agree question 1, we would miss out a planning application that would fill in the detail that we've asked about, you know, about what's it going to look like, how green is it going to be, that, you know, it seems to me that would be wrong. That would be slightly wrong. And as we're only asking to note it, I mean, all the questions relate to design in some way and layout, isn't it? You know, so I will have more to say on it when we come to it, but it seems to me very odd that we're doing it this way, I have to say.
Councillor, just to cover that, the question 1, it is in relation to the outline application only. It's not to preempt what may or may not come forward as a reserved matters, and that doesn't take away members' rights for it to be heard at plans panel. Question 1 is just in relation to this application before you.
Try to be a bit more clearer, and Andrew, I fully understood that. We're looking at a report, we had very little details, we've had a picture, but no real details. And we're asked to note it. We're asked to note it for employment purposes. It was designated for employment, we know, but there's a possibility that, as Philip has said, that by the 29th of February, we might have to look at going through that process again. It seemed to me that that would be rather foolish to do when if we note the report, the next one will be an outline statement, and then we will have the opportunity to talk about the greenness of it, the layout of it. But if we don't do that, we'll just be discussing reserved matters, and that given that there has been a petition, there is local people who are concerned about it, and there have been court cases, I think it'd be wrong to miss that step. And I certainly will be saying no to question 1.
Shall we now move on to the comments? Are there any comments at this stage? Councillor Jones?
I particularly don't like the word public transport because it's not public transport, they're run by private companies. And private companies have repeatedly proved across the city that they can remove services whenever they want. That's pretty clear. Generally speaking, at some expense for us to restore it. This particular piece is not well served by public transport, and I'm very clear about it. But sorry, private transport. You've got me going with it now. So how can I put it? For that reason, all that this will do, in my view, was increase the amount of traffic in that area, and that's not what we're trying to do. We're trying to get people onto what may become public transport later on. So I'm concerned on that area alone. It doesn't actually fit.
Councillor Stevenson?
Mindful to keep points on planning matters, Chair, and not stretch into other areas that aren't within our control as members. I would just add that I think an application of this nature, the fact it's come to us a position statement, all aspects of it must come back to this plans panel for proper consideration, given the history of it. I'm concerned, as I mentioned the question to Councillor Dobson earlier, around the negotiations that have been going on for 12 months whilst this has been going through a legal process, and that there's still a risk of further legal process to come. So I think it must come back to us here, and we must be able to consider it in all aspects properly and with all due diligence, and with the opportunities for residents and concerned groups to be able to bring their attentions to us as well at the proper time.
We'll take all the comments, and then obviously we'll move on to the questions, and some of those issues would be covered. Councillor Barry Anderson?
I mean, if we, again, just coming back to paragraph 2, conversations have been taking place with officers for the last 12 months. Surely we should have been getting an application with more details in it. You must have been discussing something for the last 12 months. And you've said that you've discussed highways, including parking, access and trip movements. Well, we've brought that up as a potential issue today. So there must have been some outputs, even areas of where you might bring before plans panel today. There are various scenarios, that you've discussed. That's not here. I do genuinely think this is a bit premature bringing forward this at this stage. I'm not saying that if you had brought forward it with a lot more detail in it, that we wouldn't be making a different decision. What I'm saying is this is a bit premature, and it would have been far better to have brought an application with a lot more detail behind it, so that we can try and get a better idea for ourselves, visualize it, what it is going to look like, what the impact is or is not going to be, the implications highways wise. And also, I can't unknow what I heard yesterday at a seminar, which was talking about WICA's views on transport within this particular location in terms of a Section 106 agreement. And I know that, but I'm not going to put it in the public domain. But this needs to be discussed more clearly based on what was just said half an hour ago, because they were expressing concerns about connectivity, not just in this area, but in other parts. Because when we were discussing potential industrial sites yesterday, that was one of the issues that came up, is how we're going to connect it and some of the issues and concerns. So we asked yesterday at the meeting, this is a meeting of development plans, to try and get WICA to come and discuss more closely with us what their plans were. And this is a site that does need a greater discussion on it. An example would be the train. Fine. So you get the train out from the centre of Leeds. That'll cost you whatever it costs, £7, £8. You then got to pay your £2 to get for mayor's fares. You know, it's starting to get to the point where it's quite expensive to come all the way out. And is it more economical for the individual to use a car rather than using the private public transport? Just please, for the sake of the debate here, can we call it public transport, just to get the discussion moving on? You know, so I've got concerns that this is premature, and I cannot at this stage support it moving forward.
I can see which direction that we are moving on to, but are there any other questions, comments from the members before we move on? No? Right, in that case, we are invited to comment on the emerging of proposal and address the following issues on page 74 of the agenda. So if I ask David to go through from 1 to 5 questions, and then we'll sum it up. And I understand, Barry, what you're saying, so this is your opportunity now to say it.
Thank you, Chair. So the first question is, given the allocation of the site for employment purposes and that only means of access is being considered at this stage, are members happy for the decision to be delegated to officers? That's just in respect to this outline application, subject to those outstanding matters of a technical specialist nature being resolved, so appropriate restrictions and conditions can be imposed. I think, well,
sorry, so it was just a question. I understand it, but I want to be clear. So that means if we were to say yes to this, we would only see this application again as reserves matters. Is that correct?
That's correct. Yes, but I think the view that I've seen the strong view that seems to be coming from the plans panel is that the plans panel would like this application, the outline application, to come back with a full report before it, before any final determination is made, and that's fine. And I think that bleeds into question 2, which is, do members have any comments regarding the indicative layout of the buildings? And I think the answer to that is yes, there are some concerns there, but you probably want at this stage more information to help you with your consideration of that matter. Probably the same with the design approach. This is all caveated by the fact that, of course, the details have to be submitted later on, but my understanding is that members want to see that so that they can influence the form of those details as they come forward. Then in respect of indicative landscaping strategy, I suppose that, again, members have been talking about the landscaping, the importance of landscaping in terms of the screening and filtering of views of the development, not only from the motorway, but also from views from local residents, and again, wanting more information in that respect. And then in terms of the additional comments, I've got those mainly in and around the public transport connectivity of the site. What's happening as been described by David in terms of the springs, so that you get a full picture of what exists and what's likely to be coming forward in the future, and how this development will fit with that.
Any additional questions before we move on? Yes, Councillor McKenna.
Not a question, Chair, but it's a comment. Given that this was designated as an employment site, and we won't go into the background again, we're all very well aware of that, but in the right circumstances, I would still support this for an employment site. I'd just like to make that clear, because I have raised questions that my seem rather hostile.
So all in favor? Oh, sorry. Yeah. I'm in a different meeting, sorry. Can we,
Just agreeing with my summary.
sorry. Sorry, I must have been in a different meeting. So can we take a 5 minutes comfort break and then we'll come back to the item 9, if that's okay with members? Going on to item 9, which will be presented by Lydia. So when you're ready.
Thank you, Chair. So first, I have a verbal update for the report. Local ward members were contacted for further information, but this was after the final report deadline. Councillor Lewis gave some comments on the site, but no further comments on the application itself. Local ward members had already provided a detailed objection, which is summarised within the original report. Regarding the notes on the site, Councillor Lewis highlighted that on slide 5 of this presentation, residents say that the vegetation that's shown has been cut down to a lower level, so the caravan is more visible. I'll repeat this again on when slide 5 is shown on the presentation for clarity. So the application relates to a retrospective proposal for the siting of one static caravan and one touring caravan, with some associated works, including the movement of an existing gate. The application has been brought back to Plans Panel after a deferral in July 2023, as some time has passed between when the item was first presented and now. I'll run through some of the main points of the application for context and background. The screen shows the outline of the site in red. As you can see, the site has a hedge buffer to the east and south. There are residential properties to the south of the site on Sandgate Terrace and other allotments to the north and west of the plot. The site is protected by local green space under GE1 of the Kippax neighbourhood plan, and this development would be contrary to this policy, and the appropriate test requires that the applicant put forward very special circumstances. You can see the northeast corner where the static caravan and touring caravan are sited, and the west corner where historic buildings are sited. So that's here and here. To give an overview of the proposal and its background, the family were living roadside previously to moving onto the site at Sandgate Stables, and 2 of the applicant's children are attending a local primary school. The impact on the living situation of the children has been given substantial weight within the report, and the current update in the report, in line with planning policy and planning policy for traveller sites and national planning policy framework. The policy will be contrary to policies GE1 of the Kippax neighbourhood plan, GS1 of the SAP, G6 of the core strategy. However, it's for members to decide if the very special circumstances outweigh the very special circumstances set out are considered to outweigh this. A 3-year temporary permission, which is personal to the applicant and his family only, has been considered to be suitable in this instance, as it will allow for more sites to come forward through the local plan and will not disrupt the children's education or safety. A temporary permission will also allow the allotment to retain its designated use, and a condition is also proposed for the land to be returned to its original state following the cessation of the permitted use. It's also important to note that 2 sites currently provided by the council, Cottonley Springs and Kadaka Park, totaling 49 pitches, are full, and the council doesn't yet have a 5-year supply of deliverable sites. This has been identified by planning policy as 2.3 years. So this shows the current retrospective proposal with some alterations to the site layout, such as the movement of the gate, and also in the northeast corner, you can see the touring caravan and the static caravan placed here. To the south are 2 open grass areas that have now been identified as areas for 2 ponies to graze. And these are the changes which were made by the applicant during the time when the application was deferred. And there's also an area just above where the ponies are grazing, which is identified as allotment land. I've also included some photos of the site. Please note that these were taken at the start of the application process. So the photos show the static caravan and touring caravan in situ. And also the open grassed area. So Councillor Lewis noted that in relation to this slide, residents say that the vegetation is shown to be cut down to a lower level and that the caravan and touring caravan are more visible. I would suggest that members attach a condition to the decision notice that requires the vegetation to be retained at a height which will mitigate the visual appearance. This can be sought through a site meeting, which would then measure what the height the hedge should be, sorry, not fence, And this can be determined on site. We can measure the height of what the fence should be to ensure that it can be maintained at that minimum height. Last July, members deferred this item to allow further information to be gathered on a number of points, and this information was provided by policy and legal officers, Leeds Gate, the school head teacher, and a revised plan was submitted by the applicant. The points were returning some of the land back to allotment land, which the applicant has done through this plan. They've shown this allotment land here. Information relating to the land allowed per horse for grazing. It's been determined that there is sufficient space for the horses to graze. Advice from Leeds Gate, the school and ward members. The impact on the children's education has been stated by both Leeds Gate and the head teacher, that should the family be required to leave the site with no alternative other than to live roadside, this would be harmful for their education and stability. More information in relation to the refusal and any consequences, and also any legal update on the context of why the family left Cottonley Springs and if this is a material consideration to the application. So regarding that, the scope and context of the background, less than substantial weight should be attributed to the background choices made, and more substantial weight should be applied to what is in the best interest of the children. Thank you.
Right. There are no speakers for this item. Therefore, do member have any questions to the officers? Councillor Miller?
Hi there. One of the main reasons that members voted to defer the decision was to understand why the family had left the Cottingley Springs site. This is referenced in the minutes from the meeting in Councillor McKenna's seconding of the motion to defer. Unfortunately, having read the updated report, there is no information whatsoever about why the family decided to leave the site. In paragraph 5 on page 2 of the updated report, there is a reference to personal circumstances and a background account that have impacted the decision to move to the current site. And that's it. Has the information been sought from the applicant as to why they were where they decided to move off the site, which was requested by members at the last meeting? And if it has been requested, why has it not been included in the updated report?
So from the minutes, in terms of what panel members wanted to gain in terms of information, one of the bullet points was to take any legal advice on the scope and context of what weight could be applied to the history of the family and why they left Cottingley Springs, and if this is material to the application. When discussing this with legal, it was determined that the personal circumstances and background weren't to be a significant weight wasn't to be attributed to that, and that what members should focus on is the application that we currently have in front of us and the current status of where the family are living at the moment and the impacts that could be had to that should they have to leave this site. The background context shouldn't be given as much weight as the current status of the family.
That's not quite my understanding of what members asked for, and I think members would hopefully be happy to agree that there was a definite desire to understand why the family left the site. And as I said, in paragraph 5, it references Councillor McKenna's seconding of the motion to defer, and there's an explicit reference to understand not only how much weight could be given to the history of why they moved, but why they had moved specifically. And the reason why this is so important is because the report gives significant weight to the lack of provision of gypsy and traveller sites with long waiting lists for existing pitches. Therefore, members wanted to understand why this family had chosen to leave their pitch on a council run site despite such a huge demand for such a pitch. And despite members asking for this information, it hasn't been provided. traveller families are affected by the lack of sites. I'm sure everyone would agree by that. But in this particular instance, in this particular application in front of us today, the family were fortunate enough to secure a site and they chose to leave it. My question is, why has such a weight been given to the lack of sites in the decision to grant permission when there's no evidence provided that the lack of sites has affected this particular applicant in the case before us, given the fact that they had a site and chose to leave it? But again, we don't know why they chose to leave it.
Yes, thank you, Councillor. It is a very difficult situation. I understand why you're asking the question. I understand why it's pertinent to the decision that you've got to reach. But from a planning perspective, we can only push it so far in the sense of asking why they left. We've been told that they've left because there was some sort of dispute. But from our perspective, from an office perspective, we always drag it back to policy and what does policy say? And also looking at the case law and how previous appeal decisions have been dealt with. And ultimately, where that takes us is to a direction is that we've got a proposal and we have to consider it against the planning policies that exist. Yes, they've made a choice to leave a site where they had a permanent pitch, but their reasons for doing so don't fall within our consideration in terms of giving substantial weight to it or any significant weight when we're actually reaching a decision on it. Now, it's difficult because I understand the point that, and people aren't making this allegation, but because we don't know all the context, you could read into it that a position has been manufactured, and therefore you follow that to its logical conclusion. If it's been manufactured, then there could be an abuse of planning control and abuse of the planning system, as it were, to manufacture a position where you get a permission. So I understand that, but when we're dealing with gypsy and travellers sites, that's not the way the logic works in a planning sense. It's in essence, they've got a proposal. It is retrospective. They've got a proposal. We've got planning policies, and we need to consider it against those planning policies that exist. So, I mean, in summary, we know that this is contrary to policy in respect of the designation of the land. We know it's contrary to policy in terms of gypsy and traveller sites, H7, because it doesn't meet all the criteria there. So then the decision for officers in terms of making a recommendation and members determine, are there very special circumstances, because that's the test, to justify a departure from policy. And then we're into the world of the 5-year supply, not having a 5-year supply, the unmet need for traveller sites, and the issue of what's in the best interests of the children. So that's the position we're in, and I'm sorry that we can't, furnish you with a more satisfactory answer.
Thanks, Chair. No, I appreciate that, David. I think the point I'm making is there's not really any reference to those questions being asked in this report. Obviously, you've referenced that officers have asked those questions at a previous point. Members clearly weren't satisfied that the questions had been asked sufficiently. That's why we deferred it in part to ask those questions again. From the officer's perspective, there's no reference that I'm not aware that those questions have actually been asked since that last meeting. There's certainly no evidence that they have been asked in the updated report. And then I just wanted to ask one more question in regards to the reason that we are, it's recommended that we grant a 3-year permission as opposed to a a permission indefinitely or a permission for the period of the child's education. The reason that's given for that is that the provision and demand for gypsy and traveller pitches could change within a much shorter time scale than for the length of a whole child's education, and therefore it's appropriate for a temporary permission to reflect this. Why is the availability of sites being considered as part of the recommendation when we've been given no evidence that the family actually wants to move onto a traveller site? So my question is, there's obviously been a decision made that we should grant a 3-year permission based on the fact that provision for sites could change. In this report, there is no indication that the family, if they were offered a site, would actually accept that site. So why are we limiting why are we limiting it to 3 years, and why isn't there a recommendation for an indefinite stay, given the fact there's no intention, based on what evidence we've been given here today, that the family would actually accept such a site should the provision change?
I think if there is sites available and they're refusing, that would change the context. But I have had a discussion with the agent about this, and they'd said that a 3-year temporary permission would be acceptable for the family, and that obviously should a site come forward on a permanent site, that would be something they'd be willing to look at, and that they are getting on the waiting list as well, so that they can go onto a permanent site. But obviously just not the site that they had come off previously, which they'd had this issue on, which they needed to move off in the first place.
Mr. Miller, do you want to come back?
Yeah, I don't really understand how we can say that that context would change things if a site came up, despite the fact that they have had a site and chosen to move off the site. You once again referenced why they moved off the site, but I don't know why that is the case. We don't know in this report why that is the case, that they moved off the site. That's all my questions.
So the agent had, when they came to panel in July, said that there was an altercation or a reason as to why they'd had to move off that site for the safety of the children. Obviously, we've not got the exact details of what that is, but that's the details that we've got so far. And as David said, as far as we can push that in terms of getting that detail from the applicant and their agent.
Councillor Stevenson?
I've got a number of questions, Chair. I think Councillor Miller has very eloquently set out the issues and the deficiencies within this. And I understand that there's certain things David can and can't say, and some things that we can. I think it's very clear that this is very much a case of playing a system in order to try and get planning permission on here, given the swinging of different arguments. Is the applicant or their agent here? Because I did have some questions following up from the last session that I would like answers to if they are in the room. Is that a possibility?
It would be your discretion, Chair, if you want to call up and have some questions put to clarify.
I think after listening to members and recalling my memory in July last year, I think it's important that we do, if there are some points that member needs to clarify with the agent or the applicant, they should come on the table. Is anybody here?
The agent.
Yeah.
Is Mark, do you want to come onto the table, please? Members do have some questions or to yourself. Councillor Stevenson.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for coming to answer some more questions. If you recall last time, I asked you some questions specifically around the education of the children on this site at present. And at the time, do you recall that you suggested to us that the primary age children were accessing primary education at the end of the road in the school there, but there was some secondary age children that weren't attending secondary education, but you suggested that they were in receipt of education from the Gypsy and Traveller gate, as it's called. Is that still the position as far as you're aware?
Yeah, that's still the same position. The children get education through Leeds Gate. Leeds Gate are here today, and they can confirm that.
Well, that would actually be very useful if that, yeah, is that okay? Because I think. Hi. Because the reason I asked the question, Chair, for context, is after the meeting, I had some safeguarding concerns separate to planning, and I did ask for a briefing from Gate. Would you like to introduce yourself? Sorry.
If you can switch your mic on, please.
Okay. My name's Ellie Rogers. I'm the CEO of Leeds Gypsy and Traveller Exchange.
So Ellie, when we spoke, I asked you a specific question around the delivery of education because I was a bit concerned that perhaps there were children in the city that were receiving education from institutions that aren't registered with Ofsted. And can you just confirm for panel what you said to me on our briefing, which is that Gate does not deliver education provision. You do deliver sessions as such to supplement what's effectively would be otherwise known as, I guess, elective home education, but you are not delivering a secondary curriculum to students.
Yeah, Councillor, that's right. So you sent me an email, inquired about our education provision at Leeds Gate and asking me if we were Ofsted registered, and then arranged a meeting with yourself and we discussed the provision that we do have. So most Gypsy Traveller children come out of school around 11 and become elective home educated. Within the community, that's very common. It's also an option. It's a legal option that any family can take in this country to do that. So we aim to support those families who have taken that decision. So we run a homework club, which happens on a Wednesday morning for about an hour and a half. We also have youth groups available for those young people. So Mr. Smith's teenage children can access all of that provision through Leeds Gate, our homework club, our youth work, and one-to-ones with our youth workers. That's what our offer would be to those children.
Okay, thank you. So in terms of, just for clarity on this point, and then I'll stop and we'll move on. In that, so it is not the case that the secondary age children are in state education. They are being electively home educated and have some additional support from Gate, but they are not being educated by Gate.
I don't know the legal status of the children's education, but I do know that they are accessing our educational support. I would assume that they're elective home educated, but I can't say that I've seen that. So that would be our offer to those children. I think it's probably important for me to say at this point that regardless of whether they are accessing a school or not a school from Leeds Gate, the decision that the panel would make today would be around the home of those children. So essentially a decision that would lead to the consequence of that family having to leave that piece of land would then make them legally homeless. So a traveller that lives in a caravan on the side of the road that has nowhere to legally park that caravan is legally homeless. So they might have a roof over their head, but there's nowhere for them to legally stop.
Sorry to interject. Can I just say, that wasn't the question I asked.
Yeah,
if that's a strain to the territories, we're going to have objectors back. So can we just disregard that part? Thank you.
Or if you can just answer the questions, please. Okay, thank you. Are there any other questions for the either the applicant or the schools? No? Thank you very much for your time. Thank you. Move on to the questions to the officers. 'Cause, 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 'cause
Thank you. Right, you mentioned at the beginning that the photos you showed us were at the start of the process. Or that you shared on screen. Was that just in reference to the vegetation, or was there any suggestion that there's been any more development since or otherwise that would be in breach of control?
That was just to firstly refresh members' minds of what the site looked like, and also just to kind of give clarification around when Councillor Lewis had noted that vegetation height had changed. So kind of just to give an idea of what that looked like before. We're not aware of what that looks like now and how high that vegetation is. But obviously that can grow back, and we can put a condition on the height of that.
And is it still the case that because what's there at present is in breach of control, the enforcement is just in abeyance until this application is resolved? Well, is that correct?
I think there is an enforcement case open that is just on hold while the application is processing.
On page 105 in the minutes from our last meeting, it refers to a point Councillor Miller made earlier that the justification for leaving the site of the family leaving was that there were some concerns around the children's safety and well-being. As presumably all of us in the room are corporate parents, has any referral been made to children's safeguarding following that disclosure?
We haven't done that, but the family did remove themselves from the site. So it was that the family were concerned for the safety of the children being on the site, and they've then removed themselves from that site. It wasn't that there was a concern for the safety of the children from officers in terms of the situation that they were in now.
Okay, I think if there's a safety issue for some children, there's likely to be for others. So somebody might want to pick that up after this meeting as a concern, a safeguarding concern. The final question I think I had, Chair, was in the pack on page 107, reference is made to it says members were reminded, as we were, of an appeal in 2018 at Hollinghurst of a retrospective application for Travellers Land, which was refused by panel but allowed on appeal. Obviously, that would have very little bearing on the circumstances of the decision we've got to make today, but I think that's some attempt to let us know about the risks should we refuse today. Can somebody just clarify for me? My understanding is that whilst this application is wholly green space, that Hollinghurst case was actually brownfield land and wasn't green space. Can that be confirmed that it's not a like for like example?
My recollection was that was sort of an extended garden area, so it'd be greenfield in status.
Hang on, Chair. Yeah, I think part of the site, certainly the whole of the site didn't fall in the green belt, but the site either bounded or a small part of the site was in the green belt. So that test in terms of very special circumstances wasn't a key test as it is in this particular application. I can provide a little bit more detail on that appeal if that's helpful.
It's more of if the argument's been made to us that a case like this previously was lost at appeal, then I'd want some assurance that it was exactly the same, really, because if it is a case that it's actually, which I think it is mostly brownfield with a small bit of garden space, it's not at all like this application, and I think that would be useful in terms of us balancing risks. And one thing I've just remembered, Chair, in terms of the 3-year provision for the site that Councillor Miller raised, if the justification is that it's 3 years because within that time there might be provision of sites that are made and therefore means that the council delivers its site allocations plan. Well, where are they? Is there a plan we're not aware of? Because as far as I'm concerned, the SAP's now being approved and the next SAP is being process is being started, and I haven't seen any sites being put forward at present. So I think 3 years is probably a little optimistic, unless you've got or somebody's got a dossier somewhere that elected members haven't seen. And I'm sure they'll be very interested if they're going to be in their wards.
So we got a response from Planning Policy, who have been doing some work on this, and they did note that sites could come forward, that this approach is being taken to grant temporary permissions while sites do come forward and while we are in a position of only 2.3 years supply of gypsy and traveller sites. And I don't know if we've got any. I'm just checking to see if I've got any examples of ones that are coming forward.
I think the situation we've got at the moment, councillor, is as part of the latest local plan review. That includes a call for sites. So I'm not entirely sure where we're at in terms of that process, but actively the council is seeking sites to come forward and we'll assess them. The reasoning around the 3 years is there's a degree of consistency needed. And we don't want to, it's a difficult one, and in 3 years' time, the situation might not have changed. We just don't know. But there's another application in the northwest of the city that was granted with a 3-year permission. So that seems to be a reasonable length to allow these things to come further up the chain, as it were, and those sites might be available in the future.
Are there any other questions? Any comments? Councillor Sharp?
Thanks, Chair. When this came to us in July last year, it was we had to take on board very special circumstances, and I remember making a comment that I didn't feel we'd been given enough information about the family, why they'd made themselves homeless, to be able to come to a decision of those very special circumstances. And I feel that we've not got any further. This application has come pretty much the same as it came to us in July.
Any other comments? I'll take Councillor Miller and then Councillor Stevenson.
Yeah, just to echo Councillor Sharp, I think it's, from my perspective, it's clear that there were some questions that members asked in their deferral which just haven't been answered today, which is really disappointing. This report contains almost no information, which we didn't have last time, which 6 months on makes it very difficult to agree with the recommendation, given that a huge amount of evidence is needed to say that there are very special circumstances when the recommendation goes against so many planning laws. So unfortunately, I'll be voting for refusal of the recommendation today.
Councillor Stevenson.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I mean, we did this justice last time, I think, and I remember we talked a lot about choices, I think was my key phrase at the time. I think from what I've heard today and read these slight updates in the report, we're being asked to weigh the personal circumstances as a special need with the harm, and whether that outweighs harm or otherwise, for application otherwise would be an appropriate development. We heard earlier today that the background context should be disregarded. I think the legal advice is there is no further information, but in any sense, the reason for leaving the previous site does not carry weight, is what I think I heard, or significant weight earlier on. You can correct me if you want, but I think that's what I heard.
Yes, sorry, Councillor. The way that what we're saying is that, yes, that should certainly carry far less weight than the current position that exists in terms of the best interest of the child, etc.
So what I'm being asked, what we're being asked, is that we weigh the current situation, which seems to be predicated on a location because the primary age children are in a primary school nearby, and that seems to be what we're being asked to weigh up, that bit there, in terms of the harm. And the bit I struggle with on that point comes back to choice, because if it was a case that all the children were settled in an education provision in the locality, and that will be the duration for the next 15 years, that might be slightly different. But we know that because of the choices made by the family, that very soon those children will be removed from state education, because the decision is to either, we think, collectively home educate, but certainly not to educate them in secondary. So to me, I struggle with that because we're being asked for something that's very time limited in a sense anyway. But if a decision is made to withdraw children from education at a certain age, decisions can be made now to withdraw those children earlier, to move schools, to access education elsewhere. It's not the fact that they can only access education on that one site. So for me, in terms of weighing that up, I don't think it outweighs the harm that would be caused to this area. I think it causes some greater concerns should permission be given on this site, because we've heard from officers that they're desperate to find fixed sites in the next plan period, and there will be fears locally that once you have one starting to creep in, then perhaps the land starts to move and other allocations come on in future. Supporting Councillor Miller's comments, and if he wishes to move it formally, I'll be happy to second it.
Let me just take a few more comments and then we'll move on to that particular. Any other comments? Before Councillor Miller makes a proposal, can I ask David to sum it up and then obviously see if we can find a way to deal with your request?
Yes, thank you, Chair. So it looks as though we're moving towards a position where members are going to resolve at least put forward a motion not to accept the officer recommendation on the basis that it's not convinced that the very special circumstances have been demonstrated to justify a departure from policy in respect of local green space. Now, if members go down that particular route, what our normal course of events would be to bring back a report to a future plans panel to set out a suggested wording for a reason for refusal based on what members have said. It may also be that as part of that report that we give some contextual advice as to the likely success or not at appeal. And that will be a matter that I'm just saying that that's a matter as officers we'll have to reflect on, and it would be appropriate for us to give you that advice, particularly if it is a concern. So that's the format and the basis on which we would go forward if members are minded to put that forward as a recommendation.
Miller, do you want to say anything?
Yeah, I'm happy to propose that we refuse the recommendation.
All in favour? Anyone against? Any abstentions? So that's carried. Ask clerk to confirm that.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I would appear that I have got 5 for, 1 against and 2 abstentions. If that's correct. Thank you.
Okay, just for the purpose of clarity, just to confirm then that members have resolved not to accept the officer recommendation, and we will bring back a report to a future plans panel, which will set out some suggested wording for that reason for refusal for members to consider.
Thank you, Lydia. Moving on to item 10. I can ask Stephen.
Chair, Chair, can I just make a comment? I know we're finished, but we really have to do something about the lack of traveller sites. It's imperative that we do. I hear it's what Councillor Stevenson said regarding nobody really wants them in their ward, and we know that. But at the end of the day, we're legally obliged to do it. And I'd ask David to take a very strong message that we have to really take this on board.
You ready, Mr. Wilkinson? Yeah? Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Chair. This application relates to the change of use of land for the siting of 8 glamping units for holiday use, a storage which includes a storage building and ancillary works, including a new access road. And that's at land off Hall Park Road in Walton. Now, the application was previously considered by panel on the 1st of June last year. However, it was resolved to defer considerations for a number of areas, including highways, the footpath link, drainage, disabled access and consultation with the community. And I'll go into these in a little bit. But before I start, there's just a couple of updates since the publication of the report. Firstly, the Nature Conservation Officer has recommended that an additional planning condition relating to wildlife pond enhancement and an ecological design strategy, which will help improve the habitats for the great crested newts, which are mentioned in the report. So that's a further condition which we'd like to add to the number of conditions that are listed at the start of the report. Now, in addition, a further letter of representation has been received yesterday from Councillors Lamb and Harrington. And in summary, the letter reiterates their previous objections to the scheme in relation to lack of public consultation, the management of the site, conflicts with the neighbourhood plan, poor mobile reception, sewerage infrastructure and drainage issues, the lack of facilities within Walton, and highway and pedestrian safety. And additionally, Councillor Stables and Lamb have provided a series of photographs and videos to officers on behalf of local residents. And these show a person in a mobility scooter and farm traffic using Blind Lane, which is the footpath, which I'll show you in my images in a little while, as well as overflowing sewers and drainage problems. I'll start with just a quick refresher of what the proposals involve, because it was quite a while ago and it was last at panel. So the site is etched in red there. It's currently in agricultural use, and the blue line shows the applicant's other ownership line adjacent to the site. So the proposals will be for 8 glamping units, which are in the top field there. So there's 5 along the top edge and 3 along the bottom. Then you've also got a car park with 11 spaces towards the bottom left of that field, the access coming off Hall Park Road to the east, and then the pedestrian link going off to the west of the site. These were the glamping units which were proposed. So these are called amphipod glamping units, essentially just on some small stilts above the ground with a timber finish, and then the ends are painted metal. This was just an image of a storage building, so it was akin to a shed. This was just a cross section of showing the amphipods in relation to some of the landscaping and existing landscape and landscape enhancements which were proposed. And then this was the indicative drainage layout, which shows sewerage and grey water from the glamping site going to a pumping station towards the bottom of the site, and then connecting to the public sewer on Hall Park Road at the bottom at a point to be agreed at a later date. And this is the context of the site. So it lies to the northeast corner of Walton, where the red cross is there. This is just a wider view of the village and where the site relates. So it's an edge of settlement location. And then you can see there you've got the Four Parks Trading Estate further south, as well as Boston Spa across the river, and that's Wetherby to the west there. So this is an image from the front of a site near where the access road would be going. So the glamping site's going behind that row of trees, the second row there. So you've got the hedgerow and then the row of trees. That's another similar image. This is an image looking back towards the village of Walton. So that's the nearest dwelling that you can see towards the left-hand side. And then the actual glamping site would be going behind the trees on the right-hand side there. This is the context of Hall Park Road, so it's like a country lane at this point. This is an image showing where the proposed pedestrian access would have been coming out. This is along the footpath to the west, which is called Blind Lane. And this is an image just looking the other way from where that gate was. And this is where Blind Lane connects to the main streets in Walton, which we walked up when we went on site last time. This is an image from the neighbourhood plan, which looks to maintain key views, and I think we discussed last time and in the report that we don't consider that the glamping site would impact on any of these key views, given its location there set up beyond that dashed white line, which is labelled Hall Park Road in the top right-hand corner. This is an image of some of the ecological enhancements and landscaping buffers which we're going to be put in. Now, since the application last came to panel, there's been a change in circumstances on the site insofar as the gate that you can see on the left has been installed along Blind Lane. So the effect this would have is block users using the proposed pedestrian link and coming down Blind Lane to access Walton. And notably on the right there, you can see another farm gate, and that's actually owned by the applicants, which would offer a potential for an alternative access to bypass that locked gate. And this is just an indicative image, just showing you. So the red cross is where the pedestrian access is proposed. The purple line is where the new gate's installed. So you could see if people were to walk up there, then they'd get stuck at that purple line as it is at the moment. So we're not sure who's installed that gate at this moment in time, but the applicant has got access to the yellow gate down there, which would offer potential to bypass it. Now, in terms of a gate and Blind Lane itself, so last time at panel we were asked to clarify the status of the path to the side and whether it was a public right of way or not. And it's not a public right of way; it's a non-definitive one. So that means that a claim was put in, but it's not part of the legal record at the moment. But what it is it's a private footpath, and the applicant has submitted title and deed extracts, which are in Appendix 2, which indicate that the applicant and those with the landowner's permission, i.e. the glamping site users, would have a right of access along Blind Lane all the way along. So ultimately, whilst there is a lock gate there at the moment, it's essentially a private matter that would need to be resolved outside the planning process. However, it should be reasonably expected that it's capable of being resolved by the applicant in the future, given the evidence they've provided in terms of their legal access rights across that lane. And notwithstanding this, there's also the potential for the alternative access points, which I pointed out, which would provide a link from the yellow cross there up towards that dash path, which would be an alternative route, which is within the applicant's ownership. We're also asked for, this links in with the highways issues, and from officers' point of view, this footpath link is a positive element of the scheme. However, it's not unusual for similar forms of holiday accommodation, such as camping, glamping, or caravan sites, to be located in more remote locations or areas with no footways or street lighting. It's, you know, it's part and parcel of the countryside. There's many examples of such sites in Leeds and elsewhere in the country, and it's not reasonable to expect such developments which require a rural or semi-rural location to demonstrate urban levels of sustainability or access to services. And you know, those requirements don't exist within our development plan policies or the MPPF either. So the applicant's done the best to try and improve accessibility of the site through providing this footpath link. You know, and the fact that the footpath link might be unmade and unlit once it gets to Blind Lane is, you know, is part and parcel of what you find in the countryside. You know, and these paths in the countryside also serve a variety of, you know, users, walkers, farm vehicles, horse riders, for instance. You know, and people you know, take account of the surroundings when they're using this style of path. So in terms of the disabled access point, we agreed verbally prior to the last meeting that they were going to provide a glamping unit which was wheelchair accessible. They've now shown some plans showing how this could be created. Now, would still require some changes to this in terms of the ramp gradient, but these would be achievable and could be secured by planning condition, and the same with the actual layout of the units. But these units can be adapted to provide this form of accommodation, and we'd put a condition on saying one unit needed to be wheelchair accessible, which is in line with the proportion of units we'd expect on like a hotel style application. Just a very brief summary of the other main issues that we looked at last time. So we looked at the impact on the countryside, and you know, that it provides a small scale tourism within the countryside, helping to support the rural economy. And it was considered a combination of a low density layout, setback from the main viewpoints, and limited scale and number of glamping units. And landscape enhancements would ensure that it wasn't overly conspicuous and safeguarded the character. And then in terms of the impact on the neighbours, the small scale again is not likely to be a significant noise generator. And the applicants have sought to limit the noise generation by setting the development away from the residential properties, using small glamping units. And you know, there's also going to be limited vehicle movements as well. And they also put in a noise impact assessment which supported these claims. There's going to be a biodiversity net gain from the sites. Well, one of the key remaining issues that local residents have raised is the impact on local drainage and sewerage issues. And you know, as the local authority, we've sought specialist advice on these matters. And over the course of the application, the applicants have looked at various approaches to resolve these drainage issues and provide more information. However, notably, the Environment Agency, Yorkshire Water, our LCC drainage officers and the local drainage board all recommend that a connection to the main foul sewer network is considered in the first instance. And this drainage solution remains what's proposed for the site, with the technical details of the drainage secured by condition. And this is supported by Supreme Court case law, which I've highlighted within the report, as well as Yorkshire Water and our own drainage officers. These drainage conditions will require a feasibility study to be taken by Yorkshire Water to determine the foul connection point, the capacity of the sewers, and any improvement works required in their timescales. And ultimately, if a drainage solution cannot be found, this will prevent the development going forward at that stage, and the applicant would have to look at different solutions potentially. Now, since the last application, Yorkshire Water have reiterated that, you know, this process and the requirement for a feasibility study, and ultimately they won't commit to a feasibility study until it's got planning permission and there's a start date in place. Now, we've also received a letter from Sigma Systems on behalf of local residents relating to local foul and surface water drainage. And I've noted these comments in the reports at length. And we've discussed the issues raised within this neighbouring objection and run it past our flood risk management officers. And but in summary, the letter didn't really tell us anything that we didn't already know in terms of the local drainage. We know that there's local drainage issues. However, these are pre-existing issues, and as part of these proposals, we're looking at the impact of this proposal and whether it's acceptable or not. And we think with the imposition of the planning conditions that it will be. The letter also, didn't look into these solutions that the council's putting forward in terms of the conditions. So whilst additional drainage information has been received from both sides and is noted, it doesn't alter the officers' opinions on the drainage impacts on the scheme. And we still believe that these can be suitably mitigated by appropriate planning conditions, which is the common process for such applications in keeping with the relevant case. And one final point that was picked up on and asked for by members last time was public consultation. Now, the applicants have confirmed that they've not undertaken any further public consultation in this regard. And whilst this is regrettable, it's not a matter that officers, would recommend refusal on in this instance. So, the new information from the applicant and objectors in light of the previous deferrals being considered. However, this doesn't alter our recommendation in this instance, and the application is recommended for approval subject to the conditions outlined at the start of the report. Finished it. Thank you.
Number of questions. Right. From the highways perspective, since the last time we met, what further investigations have you carried out to assess the impact on this development and also the additional comments being made by local residents to either prove or disprove their one? So can we do that one first? I've got a whole list here. So the first one is what further investigations have you carried out and what conclusions did you find when you carried out these further investigations?
When you say further investigations, in what regard?
The road safety, because we saw for ourselves when we were on site, the speed of vehicles going up and down. Residents have pointed out that the road is being used more. Will that be a matter of evidence now, because you'll be able to assess whether it is or whether it isn't? So, and whether or not what could be done to try and improve safety, because there isn't about pavements, etc. in the area. So what analysis have you come to when you heard what we said the last time? Since then, have you revisited this and looked again, and have you now got more mitigation being put in place?
There's no more mitigation being put in place. We're just reassess the information that was provided previously. We've had a look at the speeds. I've had a look at the speeds and the flows. Sorry. I look at the speeds and the flows, and they haven't gone up noticeably since the last application, since the last time we were here.
Right, next one. The next one, in terms of public transport, that it's stated in paragraph 10 that you wouldn't normally expect public transport. Fine. Okay, I understand that. But how do we make developments like this sustainable from a development perspective if we're not putting the same standards on this type of a development as we would in terms of not necessarily an inner city development? I'm not that daft. Well, maybe you think I am. But why is there not any need? Why should people have to drive to it? Why shouldn't there be these facilities being made available? And if they're not available, how come it's sustainable?
Yes, thank you, Councillor Anderson. It's probably sounds a little bit counterintuitive, this, but the answer is, in the planning sense, is sustainable development is development which complies with the policy. Now, members are going to have to come to a view on that, but in respect of those tests, it's a test about principle of development, rural land. It's the test about residential amenity. It's the test about highway safety. But there's a recognition in planning policy that you're not, as you said, you're not going to get the same levels of sustainability for these sites as urban sites. That's just a matter of fact, and it's just a product of the location. So from our perspective, it's very difficult to come up with a reason, to sustain a reason for refusal, not necessarily come up with one, but sustain a planning argument within that policy context that a rural tourism development, as it were, is unsustainable in this sort of context, because it is a form of development which is repeated throughout the countryside in very similar characteristics.
I do not know the answer to this point I'm going to make, Ward, but if this was in a suburban area, you would need to try and ensure that they were within 10 minutes of public transport, and that you would then say it was sustainable from a public transport perspective. Is there such a standard for developments like this or not? A similar one?
No, I was looking at Andrew.
Right,
No,
okay.
I'm not aware of it.
That's fine. Right, the next one, Yorkshire Water. We've heard the last time we were here about the problems that the residents have got. One thing that we can say about this development is it's not going to make the situation better, right? As a planner, you would concede that this, as a result of this development, the current drainage problems and Yorkshire Water's needing for a solution are not going to get better as a result of this, unless significant investment is put in. Now, we're in a dilemma here because one party is saying they can't do anything until they get the planning permission. The applicants aren't happy. Well, they are concerned about the viability of getting the work done prior to try and prove whether it is or isn't going to be. So how do we resolve that? Because I am very concerned at the impact on residents in terms of, we heard the last time about one person who was having to use it as a local sports club to get washed, etc. Is that still the case, or has that now been resolved?
I mean, we can only comment on the proposals in front of us, and we don't have details of, you know, the individual cases in terms of that. And I think, you know, we've not shied away from the fact that we understand that there's local drainage issues. That I think the key point is this development can't go forward unless they indicate that it's not going to have a detrimental impact on that drainage network, and there's a solution there, and that solution could come in a number of ways. It could result in upgrades to the systems. It could be linked to wider work that Yorkshire Water do. We don't know at this moment in time. That's the purpose of this feasibility study. Now, essentially, if they can't demonstrate through this feasibility study that they can connect without causing further issues, they're going to have to look for another solution. That could potentially be the off-grid storage, which they have tried to put forward, to be fair to them. But that then came the objections from the EA. So essentially, you've got to get over this first hurdle to say that whether or not they can connect to the local sewer network or not, which will be determined by the technical documents.
What I can't understand is Yorkshire Water are aware of current issues and problems. So they should be, in my view, should be designing something to try and mitigate against the current problems, right? And then in the interim, if planning permission was to be granted, they can then amend their proposals to take into effect. So in other words, they should be trying to solve the current issue, right? And this one will need to make even further improvements, because if you've got more sewage coming into the system, you've got to think of a way of moving on that sewage one way or the other. It can either bubble up or it can go through where we would like it to do. So I think we need to look into that one further. In terms of the consultation, you said it's not a planning matter, and I accept that, but bearing in mind this is going to be a controversial application, if we approve this today, the chances are there will be a lot of ill feeling locally. Any dot and comma that isn't kept correctly, any planning condition, there is going to be complaints coming in. Not a very good start. So you keep, well, not you personally, let's not personalize it. I keep being told, meeting after meeting, this is going to be done by condition. Well, we as elected members know full well that the conditions are not rigorously enforced. So how can we be sure today that the conditions that you're proposing will meet the needs of local residents and will satisfy local residents? Because if you put them down, fine, but then we get told by enforcement that they weren't written tight enough and that there are ways of getting through them. How can you reassure me that these conditions are going to be so tight that enforcement will have no issue whatsoever? They'll be able to do it almost immediately. The first issue there, they won't have to go and negotiate. They'll be able to say, yep, there you are. You've failed because you've written the condition so clearly. How can you give me that reassurance?
Just firstly, just a point of clarification on the public consultation. I think last time when the item got deferred, that was public consultation for the applicant to undertake in terms of with the parish council and local residents. In terms of what the local council have done, when we receive additional information from the applicant, we re-advertise the application to everyone that previously made comments. So from our side of it, we've done our statutory duty in terms of what the applicant has obviously chosen not to undertake any further public consultation, but we have put forward that we recommend that they do so. In terms of the conditions, I mean, a lot of the conditions are in specialist areas such as drainage and ecology, and I've already sought the draft wording of those conditions from the specialists and run them past them, and then of course the application needs to be signed off by a senior officer as well, who will check that they meet the legal condition tests and that they one of those being that they are enforceable.
Right. The next one, the neighbourhood. We're told that this isn't compliant with the neighbourhood plan. I can't see any reference as to how it now is. We were told the last time before us that it wasn't compliant with the neighbourhood plan. It's even older now, this neighbourhood plan, so we need to put even more weight on it. So what's changed to make it compliant with the neighbourhood plan now?
Last time we said that it complied with the neighbourhood plan. I don't think we were saying it didn't comply with it. Good
plan.
Yeah. Right.
The ones who are actually responsible for it.
Yeah. So
I'll be quick. Do you want to switch your mic on, Councillor Anderson, and your colleague has been waiting for
just
with the patient.
So we've heard that the biodiversity is going to be a net gain. Will the carbon footprint of the area be positive or be the same as it is?
I can't answer that question, I'm afraid, because it's not a metric that we were required to assess as part of the actual planning conditions. So the biodiversity net gain one uses an established calculator which looks at the number of units existing proposed, but in terms of the carbon footprint, whilst it will be linked, we don't have those. It's not a requirement to ask for those figures. Yeah.
The final one is the definitive path application. When was that first submitted? Do you know when that was first submitted?
Yeah, so I've clarified with the rights of way officer that it was first added. Well, the claim was first submitted on the 18th of October 2017. Now, the claim stroke submission was made by Walton Neighbourhood Plan Team, so there is an aspiration in the local area for this to become a public right of way in the future. And a separate bridleway claim's also been submitted by local horse riders. Now, the process to get that on the definitive map is quite complex, and I think it'd take a certain amount of time. But there is that aspiration. Whilst we think that they do have private access rights along that lane. There is this wider aspiration in the community for it to be a public right of way as well. Okay.
Councillor Stevenson.
Can I just return to the issue about drainage for a moment? So I just want to be clear. So as I understand it, the position is that you're asking us to approve consent subject to a condition that you then ask Yorkshire Water to do some work on in order to clarify whether the drainage proposed is sufficient enough for the approval to be executed. Is that correct?
In a roundabout way, yes. Essentially, the sewer infrastructure is off-site, and we need the Yorkshire Water technical information, and for them to undertake the feasibility study, which is the next step after the grant of permission.
Sorry, can I just add to that, just so that we're 100% clear on the process, and this follows the Supreme Court ruling. So the applicant has, or a developer has, the absolute right to link into the drainage system. That exists in law. We can't resolve from that. It's the statutory undertaker that has to resolve the issue of capacity. So that falls with them to deliver the issue of capacity. And the way that we would deal with it, which comes from the Supreme Court ruling, is to impose what we call a Grampian style condition, which would say something along the lines of the development shall not be commenced and the development shall not be occupied until such time as the appropriate and necessary drainage works to deliver an appropriate level of capacity, or the appropriate capacity, have been submitted to and agreed in writing with the local planning authority. And what would happen is, when it would be for the applicant to submit those details to the local planning authority as part of a formal application to discharge the condition, and we would then consult with Yorkshire Water on those details, but the decision would be coming from the local authority. But obviously, it would be reliant on what Yorkshire Water tell us. So that would be the process, and that's the process which has been laid out by the Supreme Court.
Okay, so why could we ask the applicant, if Yorkshire Water is saying they're not willing to do the work until we approve it? It's a bit like it's that great sort of meme of two Spider-Men, isn't it, with the guns shooting at one of them, are waiting for someone to fire. Could we not ask the applicant to do their own assessment at their cost first in order for us to make that judgment today?
Yeah, we've asked the question, but their position is no, that they won't do those works, I presume, because of the cost which is associated with those works, until they've got the security of a planning permission. And then they point to the fact, well, it's all in your control anyway, because you can put on that condition which I described.
Right, any other questions? In that case, can we move on to the comments? Councillor Stevenson.
Thank you. Well, if the applicant said no, then I think I say no, because it's from what David's just said, that the applicant's position is that they're saying no to the charge because it's in our control as a decision maker to control it by condition. And this is the issue I have. It's not in my control as a decision maker today, because what you're asking of me is to make a decision to then delegate that final authority, which is the pinch point really of whether it's going to work or not, to officers. But the reason it's before us today is because there's been a referral to panel by elected members on behalf of residents, because they want elected members to make that decision. So it's as much about a matter of process to me, really, in that if you're asking us today to approve this and then give all the actual bits that matter, the conditions part that make this viable or not, and hand that control back to officers to do with delegated decisions, then I have a problem with that. If it was a case of moving this on to conditions, and then when the condition application comes back, that should come back to panel so members can consider the detail properly and make a decision on it. Then I'd probably be a bit more open to that kind of, notwithstanding my other concerns about the application, that kind of avenue, because I have concerns about the principle of it coming to us and then being kicked back to you as such, to make it. So is there a process where those conditions, we can set now that those conditions must come back to us for final approval, not least because we've heard from the officer, apparently there's legal wording around the condition, but it hasn't been put in front of us as decision makers. So it's difficult to make a decision without knowing what the eventual outcome would be. So that will be my comments on the drainage element.
Yeah, I think there's a question there which I'll try and answer. In respect of, obviously with drainage, it's a highly technical matter. We would be very reliant on, this is the context setting, we would be reliant in terms of discharging that condition on the advice from Yorkshire Water. It's unusual for us to bring matters relating to conditions to plans panel for that reason, because it's highly technical and it's, we're so heavily reliant on the technical advice. But having said that, if members felt very strongly, then we could report an application for a discharge of a condition to plans panel so members can see the detail of that. I don't think there's anything in the officer's scheme of delegation which counts against that. We have to be very wary of timescales with dealing with conditions, because there are certain clauses within there which can take the power of determination if we don't deal with it in a certain amount of time out of our hands. But yes, it's unusual, but it is possible.
Thank you for that, David. Any other comments? Sorry, Councillor Anderson.
As I said the last time, I've still got concerns about the highways safety aspects around it, and we've already heard about the drainage issues which aren't going to improve, and I think that Yorkshire Water should be, trying to help out in this respect, and if not, the applicants, if they need it, should be willing to part fund something in order to try and get this resolved. So for that reason, and also finally, I'm still concerned about the fact that we've got a neighbourhood plan that's saying no, and we are deciding to overrule that. And I think we've got to give due weight to neighbourhood plans.
Right. If there aren't any other comments, can I ask David to sum up and then we'll move on to the votes?
Yes, there have obviously been concerns expressed in respect of drainage, in respect of highways, in respect of whether the proposal complies with the neighbourhood plan or not. If members were to go down that route, we'd need to seek clarity precisely where you see the conflict is, because I'm unclear in my own mind on that. It's really now for members, having heard the presentations, read the report, and listened to the debate, as to whether they want to move the officer recommendation or move in a different direction, Chair.
Thank you. Can we take the vote? And can I ask someone to propose and second the proposal which is in front of you? Thank you, Councillor McKenna. You want to second? No. Thank you, Councillor Gawani. Sure.
First, just because of the way these things work. So obviously there's the bit I mentioned about conditions wanting to come back. So we've had a proposal now in a second, we'll have to vote on that. But if that vote is to accept the officer recommendation, that won't include that request, will it? So can we add that in as a, if this passes, the condition request comes back. If this is a refusal when the vote comes in a moment, then obviously that's a moot point, but can we do that as a point?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if Councillor McKenna, if you are in agreement with that from Councillor Stevenson, you'd want to amend the motion that you put on the table, which is as in the officer report, but to come back with the condition. The drainage condition. And Councillor Gavani, if you're happy to second that.
So we're all clear now, yeah? Right, all in favor? Anyone against? Anyone to abstain? No. That's carried. Thank you.
So just summarise.
Sure.
So just to be clear, members have resolved to grant planning permission subject to the conditions set out on page 111 and 112. An additional condition in respect of the wildlife management scheme and ecological design strategy to be added to that, and also that any application to discharge condition in respect of drainage shall be brought back to plans panel for determination. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Date and the time for the next meeting will be Thursday, 29th of February at 1:30 p.m. And that concludes today's meeting. Thank you. And don't forget to take your cups back where you found them.